All right. And you are joining David Burton with University of Missouri Extension, and welcome to Neighboring 101. This is where we gather once a month to talk with leaders in the neighboring movement and discover ways that we can answering responses here at the same time, that we can use this idea of neighboring as part of our community and personal development. We always begin with a couple of announcements. I have 3 of them this month. One is an update on Missouri Good Neighbor Week legislation. That bill is stalled in the Missouri House of Representatives, although it has passed out of committee. It is not on the House calendar yet. I'm hopeful that it will be when they get back in session next week. But even if the Missouri House and legislature does not approve a Missouri Good Neighbor Week bill, we can still celebrate in Missouri. Starts with National Good Neighbor Day on September 28th and then goes for 6 days. I'll keep you updated on that. If you're in the Springfield area, I'm teaching Neighboring 201 classes at the Brentwood Library on March 19th and at the Republic Library on March 26th. You do need to register for those, and if you attend, you're then eligible to apply for a local neighborhood mini grant to use in your neighborhood. So that's a reason to come to those classes so you can apply. And then last announcement, the 100 Acts of Kindness Challenge begins March 20th. March 20th is Mr. Rogers' birthday. That day sometimes is referred to as Won't You Be My Neighbor Day. And there'll be a link in the follow-up email to this class about how you can participate. We're wanting to at least document 100 acts of kindness, and there's a drawing among people who submit their acts of kindness through that challenge. You can also follow that on our Facebook page, which is the Becoming an Engaged Neighbor Facebook group. So feel free to join us there as well. And then once a month, before we get to the guest, I always share a little advice from my neighborhood. And this month, it's not so much advice as it is a heartwarming story from a lady that lives here in Republic, Missouri. She lives north of town on a farm. She told me she's lived there 3 years and she's never met any of her neighbors. So she was at an event I spoke at about a month ago. She really felt like she wanted to take action. So she went home. She told her husband about it first. I want to meet my neighbors. And he said, honey, people don't do that anymore. No one wants to be bothered. But she decided to take the initiative herself, and she was going to start with the family that was across the farm road from her. Had never met them, but she knew they had children. So she put together a little basket of some food items. She stuck a couple of coloring books in there, some flowers, a nice note card that she wrote out a personal note. She said she ended her note card with, I'm going to be praying for your family, and here's my cell phone number. So she went over there to the house. There was no one home. She sat on the front porch, and she told me about 2 hours later, she got a phone call from a lady on the phone crying and in broken English, telling her that she had gotten the note. Their family is from Ukraine. They'd been here in the US for about 2 years. My friend was the first American that had really reached out to them in friendship to make a connection. The Ukrainian said they have no friends and no family here in the area, that her brother is in Kiev, and they talked on the phone for a little over an hour, she said. And so now my friend certainly has a golden opportunity here to practice being a good neighbor with a family that needs a local connection. So I can't promise each of you that you'll have a neighbor who is from Ukraine, but I can promise that you will have neighbors who are lonely and have needs and need someone to show them kindness or even to be a friend. Well, hopefully that warmed your heart today. We are talking quite a bit about kindness and friendship, and for many people, that makes them think of Mr. Rogers. Well, our guest today is Chris Rodell. Chris is the author of a book that I just finished reading. It's called Growing Up in the Real Mr. Rogers Neighborhood, Life Lessons from the Heart of Latrobe. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Pennsylvania. Close. I know there's a debate about the right pronunciation. But I think the book, I'll hold my copy up here. The book is about the influence that community had on Fred Rogers and the influence that Fred Rogers had on that community. It's a really interesting read. Chris is also the author of some other books. Some of these are great titles. A book called Use All the Crayons, The Colorful Guide to Simple Human Happiness. Also a book on Arnold Palmer called Homespun Stories of the King, and a book, Undaunted Optimist, among others. But you can get Growing Up in Mr. Rogers' Real Neighborhood through Amazon. I would certainly recommend it. And then in Chris's career as a freelance writer, often for National Enquirer, I might add, which I found very interesting in reading his book. But he's done a lot of amazing things as a freelance writer. He has wrestled alligators. He has raced Ferraris. He's gone skydiving. He's laid on a bed of nails. He even gained 20 pounds in 1 week eating like Elvis. Doesn't that sound like fun? But today our topic is Mr. Rogers and the impact kindness can have on a person and a community. Chris, welcome to Neighboring 101.
Thank you for that generous introduction.
It's great to have you. I'm glad you were able to get connected and to join us. And I've tried to warn everybody ahead of time that you're very much a storyteller, and that you have some great stories that connect here with.
Let me start with
this upcoming holiday.
I'm fine with that too. What should I wear? And he goes, it's just gonna be the two of us. Wear whatever you want.
That's a good. Is that an Irish or a Scottish joke?
That's an Irish joke today.
That's an Irish joke. I thought probably it was. It fits with this being the holiday.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again. I don't know. I can jump straight into questions, or I don't know if you want to.
Well, let me just explain a little. I've lived here 25 years now, and I did the Arnold Palmer book, and it was very popular. I knew Arnold Palmer really well because I interviewed him about 100 times over 20 years. And he was just such a great Latrobe character and just a wonderful man. I used to go in there very nervous, and I'd say, Mr. Palmer, I want you to know how excited I am about hearing you tell these historic insights. And he'd put me at ease. He'd say, I want you to know how excited I am to have you come in and blow so much sweet smoke up my ass. But he was so much fun. Yeah, he was just so much fun. I have an interesting story about him and Fred Rogers. You know, they should have been good buddies. They were 1 year apart, and the path that their lives took them was to the stratospheric heights of fame and popularity. And they didn't really get along. I first noticed that when Arnold Palmer won the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2004. I was in his office and I congratulated him. I said, how about Latrobe having 2 Presidential Medal of Freedom winners in the last 2 years? He goes, who won it before I did? And I said, Fred Rogers. He goes, he did? Damn it. So that shows how competitive he was. And I thought, maybe I misread it. Maybe I was reading something into it. But then I started looking on the internet. I couldn't find one picture of Arnold Palmer and Fred Rogers together in this small town of 8,000 people. You'd think there'd been a ribbon cutting at a hospital or something like that, that they'd have joined hands or something like that. I thought, maybe I was wrong. Maybe there's just something happened that the cameras weren't working. But then I thought Fred Rogers did 31 years of shows, 899 shows or something like that. He had on cobblers, masons, ballerinas, politicians, police officers. He had on a talking gorilla. And he never had his real neighbor, one of the most popular men on the planet. He never had Arnold Palmer on. I like to think that they said, they were doing the staff meeting, they said, we've out of everybody, let's ask the talking gorilla. If the talking gorilla says no, let's ask Palmer. But it's just odd that these two guys couldn't, there was no bonhomie between them, you know, and it just struck me as very, that's a little bit about how competitive Mr. Palmer is on aspects of it, but it had some of it might have been from Mr. Rogers too.
Yeah, yeah. It, other than the mention of the award, it never really came up in conversation with Arnold Palmer.
No, just like that.
Yeah.
But I've talked to people in his office and they said that there was a little rivalry. Now, Arnold Palmer was rivals with everyone. He was, I was doing a story about John Wayne for his magazine. And I said, did you know John Wayne? He said, I did not, but I'm friends with Clint Eastwood. We both own Pebble Beach together. Pebble Beach is one of the most beautiful places in the world. And he was saying that, he wasn't bragging. He was saying, like my wife and I say, I own all 6 seasons of Third Rock from the Sun on DVD. You know, you're not bragging about it. But he said, Clint and I just had dinner last week. And I said, well, how's he doing? He goes, well, he's like me. We're both 86, both having the same kind of troubles. I said, who would win a wrestling match right now between you and Clint Eastwood? He goes, I'd kick his ass. That's how competitive he was.
So maybe it had to do with the competitiveness with Mr.
Yeah,
Rogers.
yeah.
That is really something that they both came from that same small
They
town.
were 1 year.
I know they both had to have a lot of influence on that town,
Yeah.
but you mentioned in your book that the town and the people in it had some early influences on Mr. Rogers as well.
Yeah, Mr. Rogers was growing up, he was bullied and picked on very extensively. And that's an element of this town too. You know, it's a typical town. It's not a fairyland. There's rough people in this town. And they made fun of him because he was rich. He had a lot of money, came from a wealthy background. And because he was a shy kid, you know, and there's bullies that'll pick on people like that. He had state houses on the way home that his mother had coordinated with these neighbors. If he ever has to run away from the bullies, he could come there and see them. And so that was an indication of it. But that all changed one day. This is the other side of the town. One of the most popular guys in town was Jim Stumbaugh. And he was on the football team. He was on the debating squad, all the things, most popular guy. And Fred Rogers, Jim had an ankle injury and went to the hospital for 2 nights. Mrs. Rogers worked at the hospital and she said, Fred, I want you to get to know this guy. He could really help you. And so Fred started taking him his homework and just being himself. You know, he wasn't the shy kid anymore. He just told him stories and just became his friend. And Jim Stumbaugh's eyes opened up and he said, he told his friends when he got back to school, he says, you know what? We've been misjudging this Fred Rogers guy. He's a great guy. We got to get to know him. Almost overnight, Fred Rogers became one of the most popular kids in school. He was the editor of their paper. And they said that if there had been no Jim Stumbaugh, we never would have heard of Fred Rogers. Because Jim Stumbaugh went out of his way. He didn't know that Fred Rogers would become rich and famous. He just saw a kid that could help people and was a kind person. He was just being human. And I think Fred Rogers took a lot out of that message. When Jim Stumbaugh died, Fred Rogers went to the funeral and eulogized him.
Wow. Boy, that really speaks to the influence that any of us can have on people
that's
around
a great,
us, right?
Many of us can't grow up to be Fred Rogers, but all of us can grow up to be Jim Stumbaugh. You know, you can go out of your way. If you see somebody who's sad, who's struggling, just go put your arm around them and tell them like that. And it works out. You can change the world.
Well, I know our kids, they see all sorts of examples around themselves at school, people that are eating alone at lunch or
Yes.
People that are excluded from activities, whether it's just because they're socially awkward or even with a disability, any of those things.
Yeah.
The power of reaching out. You don't know what that person can become in their future by just showing some kindness, right?
Yeah. I tell the one story in the book about, he's a friend of mine and he can be surly. And one day he woke up with a toothache. He had a dental appointment and he was in a busy part of Pittsburgh and it was rainy and slushy. And he just decided happiness and surliness and unhappiness are decisions. They're not emotions. If you wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to be happy, you'll be happy that day. If you wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to let it get to me, it'll get to you. Now, this guy said that day he was going to let it get to him. And he ended up driving in this crowded part of town. He gets out of the car and almost runs into this guy. And the guy turns around with a big smile and he sees it's Fred Rogers. And he said, I'm the most unhappy, angry man in the world. And I run into Fred Rogers. And he goes, well, I can just talk with him on the sidewalk here. And Fred was just so effusive and, oh, I'm sorry you're having trouble with your tooth and that. They ended up going and he says, well, I'll lose him in a minute. They turn into the same dental office. They walk up the same steps and they're holding the door. And he said, it just kept getting more and more confining. And he said, I'd be reading my paper and I'd look up and Fred Rogers would make eye contact with me. and he'd like smile or say something funny. And he goes, if it had been anybody else but Fred Rogers, I would have thought it was really, really weird. Now, the thing was, we understand that. We understand if somebody else is looking at the paper and smiling at you, what the heck is this guy doing? But if it's Fred Rogers, you think it's really nice. We've got to make being really, really weird, really, really nice, really, really normal.
Yeah.
Fred Rogers was going to be really nice. No matter what my friend did, he was going to come across as the nicest guy in the world. And that's a mindset. If you wear that, and we're reminded with it here in Latrobe all the time, we see his statue. He's on our lamp posts, and there's all kinds of things about him in the neighborhood. So it's drilled into us, but there's still the element of people that are normal people here that are, just tough people. But defiant kindness, I call it.
I had someone mention that they couldn't see this with my background on. I guess I still can't. I may have to turn that off. That I was at a office recently here last week and was reading your book, and a lady came in and sat down next to me, and she saw my book and she pointed to that and she said, "Okay, was that guy for real?" And I kind of chuckled. I said, "Well, I'm reading the book. It seems as though he was for real." And I think from what you're saying, from what I got from the book, Mr. Rogers was for real.
Yeah. The big stories like that you have to refute are he was a Navy SEAL, or he was a sniper. We can't imagine somebody this good and this wholesome, enduring in these times. But he was exactly what he was. He never had a bad day, that he didn't feel about, and he was never out of character. People think it was a character. It was his character. That's the way he was. So many great stories about that.
And he kept a really rigorous, I think is the right word, schedule. I mean, he was very structured, I guess maybe is the better word.
Yeah.
Swimming at a certain time every day. And
5 o'clock he's swimming.
I wonder if the structure contributed to his happiness, or that was just
the swimming story is interesting. He got a lot out of swimming. He loved it. And they have a statue now. There's 3 statues in Pittsburgh about Fred Rogers. One, the normal one in Latrobe, you sit beside and get your picture taken. The other one is a dinosaur that has a Fred Rogers T-Rex with a Fred Rogers sweater. And it has the little trolley going up the tail. That's a popular one with the kids. And there's the one that's outside of Heinz Field where the Pittsburgh Steelers play. And that one is controversial because it's made by, some of the internet critics call it Mudman. It has blotches of things like that. And we think Fred would have loved it because there was an equal one made by the same artist in Washington, D.C. of Albert Einstein. And Fred, whenever he'd go to Washington, D.C., he would sit outside of this statue for an hour and just commune with it. And I like to think, I'm a big fan of reading about Einstein. And Einstein said that somebody asked him what the meaning of life was. He didn't say to accumulate a lot of money. He said, I think I've thought about it a lot. And when Einstein says I've thought about something, you should pay attention. And he said, I've thought about it. He goes, the only thing I can think why we're here is to help one another. And I just think that would have really resonated with Fred, that he was like that and thought the same thing. But the other thing is nice is that one down at Heinz Field looks over the river, and Fred had such an affinity with water. Now, it's my understanding, I'm trying to nail this down because I've heard some contradictory facts now, but that he would swim at 5 o'clock every morning, do like an hour's worth of swimming. And I've heard, and then I've read that he swims naked, that it was Fred Rogers skinny dipping. So that refutes all the stories about him being tattooed up and down. But the other thing he liked was he'd get out of the pool and go weigh himself, and was always thrilled that he weighed 143 pounds. All his adult life, he weighed 143 pounds. And that's important to him because 143 is his number. Remember that? Do you know that?
Yeah. What?
Oh, gosh. 1 letter for I, 4 letters for love, 3 letters for you. So that was his code. They have, I don't know whether it's his birthday is not day 143, but day 143 in Pennsylvania, we celebrate as Fred Rogers Day.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And I do remember the 143 being the code for I love
And he
you
weighed
now.
that.
I was drawing a blank.
Yeah. And he weighed 143 pounds.
Well, they again, back to that discipline, right? And the discipline of the structure. The discipline of swimming at the local YMCA, I think it was, right?
Yes.
So, but I love the way the town pays homage to him with statues and events and all that. That's wonderful. But it sounds like his character kind of bled over onto the community as well. You told several stories in your book about people moving to the town and commenting about what a kind town it was, how nice people were there. So I think there's a connection.
Well, they said, I was talking to a woman one time and she just moved here from Texas. And she said, oh, we just love Latrobe. Everyone here is so nice. I said, if you think that way, you haven't met everyone. Most people are. And I think it's the one thing that I love about the town is it mingles the tough with the tender. And that's from Arnold Palmer and Fred Rogers, both two joyful men. And here, if we do a tender thing, like to help somebody, you can say, that's what Fred would do. And people always have that in the back of their mind. It's part of our lives. Like I never watched Fred Rogers growing up. I watched Speed Racer. And I know what you're, and Scooby-Doo. And I know what you're thinking. Ruh-roh.
Yeah.
But then when we had kids, my daughters are 21 and 15. And when they were young, it was an obligation to watch Fred Rogers in Latrobe. You feel obliged. And I'm a 45-year-old man at the time watching Fred Rogers with my future on my lap. And boy, does it make an impression. I think 45-year-old men should be the number one demographic for Fred Rogers because men are so uptight about showing their feelings. Now, Fred Rogers makes you really in touch with your feelings and it makes you happy about it. And you can go through life that way. And it's just a great role model to have.
Well, you think of Scooby-Doo, what you would learn from watching that show is how to stop Egyptian mummies, right? and I've never had too many opportunities to put that to practice. But I've had lots of opportunities to practice being kind and some of the other things that you'd learn from Mr. Rogers. So for real world application, there's probably many more opportunities from Mr. Rogers.
Yeah.
Well, I know we have a few more things to visit about here as well, but I wanted to be sure everybody that's listening in live today knows that you can pose a question. If you'd like to unmute, you can, or if you're more comfortable putting it in chat, asking your question, I'll watch for them and read them off. So please.
You can get in touch with me anytime. Like people, you said I work for National Enquirer and that I used to say I was a reporter, then I was a freelance writer. Now I say I stare out the window. People go, what do you do for a living? I say I stare out the window. And I stare out the window for like an hour at a time. Then I type for like 3 minutes and I resume staring out the window. So if anybody wants to get in touch, I've got plenty of time on my hands.
Well, you did have a piece about Mr. Rogers printed in USA Today.
Yes.
I saw a tribute, which mirrors some of the book in many ways. But I don't think you mentioned in that article, but you had mentioned to me about Fred in rehab.
That's a National Enquirer story. And it was a good one. I think it's the best Fred Rogers story there is. And I don't know why they're shy about telling it because I think it's a fabulous story. I was doing stories for National Enquirer. I lived right up the street here on what was Fred Rogers Way. They renamed the town. Latrobe is where he's from, but he was raised on, he has a house in Youngstown. And that's the same with Arnold Palmer. Arnold Palmer lived on the same street. And Youngstown only has 370 people. The last mayoral election was decided by a vote of 18 to 12. So it's small town. I say it's one stoplight, 6 liquor licenses. But I lived on Fred Rogers Way when I was doing stories with the National Enquirer. And I did mostly offbeat features like Town Saved by Giant Ball of Twine, Baby Born with Wooden Leg, that kind of stuff. And so I did all these fun stories. I didn't want to do celebrity stories. And I was in the little town tavern down in Latrobe, and it's called the Lantern. And the phone rings. This was 1994, and they said, "That's your wife." And I said, "Hi, honey." And she said, "The Inquirer called. They want you to do a story about Fred Rogers." And I thought, oh, this is not going to be good, because if they're interested in him, it's got to be for something salacious. And here I am in Latrobe trying to get along with all these people. And if you say a bad thing about Fred Rogers in Latrobe, you're going to have to move. You got to leave town. And I set the phone down and I told my buddy, I said, geez, I got to do a story about Fred Rogers for the National Enquirer. 4 schools down was town drunk Dickie Kemp. He goes, Fred Rogers, he goes, I was just in rehab with his son. What's the story about? I said, Dickie, come on down here. I'm buying your drinks the rest of the night. Now, the morality of me putting Dickie Kemp on my tab for drinks after he just got out of rehab is something we'll have to debate on another day. But I wanted to hear his story. And he said that Fred Rogers had a son that had a cocaine addiction. This was acknowledged in the family book by Maxwell King, that they had drug problems. And that's not unusual for any family. It's a sad fact of life that many families had it. It's unusual that Fred Rogers, who we thought was flawless, could raise a kid that has that problem too. But I think most people would sympathize with it. So I wrote him a letter saying, Mr. Rogers, I'm Chris Rodell. I live on Fred Rogers Way in Youngstown, and I'm doing a story for the National Enquirer about your son's drug problems. I said, we think you are the perfect example to get behind this and say, tell America it can happen to anybody, that parents shouldn't feel bad about it. Here's how we can combat this problem together, which is what he should have done. He really should have done that. And after a few days, I didn't hear back, which I didn't expect to hear back. So I go into WQED where they filmed Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And I sneak in because that's what Enquirer reporters do. I snuck in through the back door, and I'm not going to go to the front door and say, I'm Chris Rodell with the National Enquirer. I wouldn't have gotten anywhere. So I get all the way up to the office, and I knock on his door, and he answers the door. And I said, Mr. Rogers, I'm sorry to bother you. I'm Chris Rodell. He goes, I got your letter. So I thought that this might work out, that he acknowledges he got the letter. And then right away, I felt an hand on my shoulder and said, you've got to leave the building. And it was Mr. McFeely. And I was thrown out of the Fred Rogers office by Mr. McFeely.
He doubled his security.
He doubled his security. Speedy delivery, speedy ejection. But Fred, it was important for me to have him acknowledge that he got the letter, that we tried to reach him. What conversation they had about that, I don't know. But really, he should have said, look, this was embarrassing, but let's get behind it. Now, the thing was, why this turned out to be such a great story was Dickie Kemp said that when Mr. Rogers would visit his son in rehab, all the other people in rehab would make fun of Mr. Rogers. And that's terrible. The people who were having drug problems and prostitutes and others like that would mock Mr. Rogers to his face. They'd go, oh, it's Fred. Fred, how are you doing? Wonderful day in my neighborhood. And that's terrible. But then one by one, they would all come sit next to him. And one by one, they would all begin to weep. They said talking to him for 10 minutes was better than 6 months of quarter classes. And I think that's just the greatest story that he could, it's almost biblical, that he could take on these people in this acre of hatred and just sit there and talk to them. He didn't have to go to rehab to visit his son. He could have said, look, I'm a public figure. I support you and love you, but I'm not going to be in a public place where I could risk my reputation. Everybody would have understood that. But he went there and he stood up to these people and he won them over and he changed lives. There's a lot to be learned from that.
Absolutely. What a story. He loved his son, was caring for him. You think he avoided the story because of the public figure aspect? He was afraid
Probably.
it would
taint
the show or something.
Trying to protect his son.
Yeah.
But he has the news that we're breaking that news, and it's going to be in a magazine that's seen by 8 million people a week. At that point, and it's read by all the producers in Hollywood, at that point you say, well, this news is getting out. How do we put the best spin on it? That's when you come forward and say, you do a show about it,
Yeah. Because he certainly wasn't shy about doing shows about controversial topics or
Yeah.
things that kind of challenge social norms.
And that's what's wonderful about him. This is right in his wheelhouse. So I think he misplayed that one. It's hard for me to second guess Fred Rogers on anything, but I think he got some bad advice. He should have listened to me.
Obviously. Yeah, we know that now. He was probably thinking that later in life.
Yeah.
Well, I know you've mentioned to me this sort of idea of him with defiant kindness.
Yeah.
Seems an odd two words to put together, but
Well, kindness is defiant anymore, though, isn't it? Like if you see someone being kind, it's an anomaly. We're not used to seeing that. And being kind is kind of contradictory these days. I always say that so many people have, a lot of our politicians go around quoting Sun Tzu, the author of Art of War, and they think it makes them tough and macho. And they have many quotes at hand. I want to hear people that have Fred Rogers quotes. Here's a Fred Rogers quote that everybody can remember and use, and it's wonderful. And Fred said that there's 3 keys to a successful life. The first one is to be kind. The second one is to be kind. I always forget the third one. You want to help me out?
to be kind.
Yes. And
Yeah.
that is just so simple, but when you break it down, every situation, if you be kind, every situation gets better.
I see that play out in lots of ways with people and their immediate neighbors. Even in the town that I live in, Republic, and the little community Facebook page, and where it seems like 2 out of every 4 posts is someone complaining about something their neighbor has done. They'd rather complain about them on social media or turn them in for a code violation than actually learn their name, show kindness, maybe lend a helping hand. What a different world and community that would be if that was our first instinct, instead of calling code enforcement over loud noise or something.
I say he's America's most unusual superhero. And his superhero power is kindness. And he died in, I think, 2002 or 4. And there was a girl that called me when she heard I was doing this book. She's 14 now. And she was bullied in school. And she just felt hopeless, having troubles at home. And then one day she saw Fred Rogers on TV. And she said, his message was just so powerful that you didn't have to be the bad way. You didn't have to be the bad girl or the mean girl, and that other people would come around to you if they saw you being nice. And it changed her life. She said Fred Rogers saved her life because he was, his message was so important to her. She ended up getting a job at the Fred Rogers Museum, working as a docent there. And she's just this wonderful kid. And that was because Fred Rogers, something she saw the documentary. Do you remember the documentary?
Yes. I just watched it a few weeks ago.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
The reason I did this book, by the way, is because the Tom Hanks movie came out. And my Arnold Palmer book was so popular in town. People said, you really need to do one on Fred Rogers. And I said that casting Tom Hanks as Fred Rogers was the greatest casting in Hollywood since 1939, when they cast a dog named Toto to play a dog named Toto. When you see the credits on The Wizard of Oz, they have all the credits, and the last one is Toto as Toto.
The documentary is really good.
It's really good.
I got that from my local library. Really enjoyed that a few weeks ago.
Yeah, that's great.
We do have at least one question in chat. There may be some others that people want to pose. Chet, who is in Ohio, asked, in what practical real world ways did Fred connect with his immediate neighbors? He says, I'm curious to learn how he, as a man of faith, put the love thy neighbor guidance into practice.
He never had a moment. He was never out of, like we said, out of character. he would reach out to people. That one example of my angry, surly friend is a good example. He saw somebody on the sidewalk who looked like they were miserable. And he practically threw an arm around him and said, let's make this day better. And he did, and with the neighbors and things like that, he was just really involved in the community, and he would help out. The McFeely Rogers Foundation to this day still does great things in the community. And it's just a way of life, and when you make that way of life, it becomes a habit, and you don't ever skip that. It becomes part of your personality. Like I said, my office is above 3 bars. It's the Tin Lizzie. And there's 3 distinct bars. And one day I was sitting there talking with one guy, and he sat down and was just one of the kindest men I've known. And he just was telling stories, asking about my family. And he's just this great guy. And he's so like Mr. Rogers. And then he got up and left. And another guy sat down, was one of the most profane, filthy storytellers. And I love that about this town, that you have both sides of that. And that's the real world one. Now, this guy would help you with anything. He's a great guy. And that's part of being absorbing what Mr. Rogers says. You drive around town, you see those things, and you hear the stories about him. But there was nothing faulty. He engaged his neighbors.
Yeah. Well, you're right. Kindness really makes you stand out in a world of not so much kindness as we sometimes see around us. But I always contend that the bar is really set pretty low. One example that comes to my mind is a new set of neighbors that moved in a little over a year ago. They're an older retired couple. They told me they had lived in 15 different communities around the United States when they had moved with work. And the husband had a minor foot surgery. We had a snowstorm, and I went down and shoveled their driveway and their sidewalk.
Yeah.
And really, it took me less than an hour. It was not a monumental job. She came out with hot chocolate and just heaping all sorts of praise. And she told me that I was the best neighbor they had ever had. And I walked home with that shovel, thinking, wow, best neighbor ever. Chest was pumped out. And I get halfway home and I think, wait, all I did was shovel their driveway, and that qualifies me as the best neighbor ever.
Yeah.
The bar is set really low.
I said that one of the things in my Use All the Crayons book is it's tips on colorful living. I said, ask all the important questions, like why are we here? Where do we go when we die? Then ask questions important only to me, like if fans of the Grateful Dead are called deadheads, what does that make those of us who revere the book Moby Dick? But in that book, I say, we spend, so many of us go to church every week and pray for God to change the world. And then we spend the entire week forgetting all our God-given ways to change the world. And I say, you want to change the world, shovel your neighbor's driveway or write a teacher a letter. Some of it meant the difference to you. Write somebody that you grew up that loved you and nurtured you. Write them a letter. That'll go into their Bible and it'll be there forever. And you can change the world like that. Just like we grill on our daughters to send a thank you note for everything. Like if you come up and shovel our driveway someday, and I hope you do, we'll send you thank you notes and cupcakes and everything.
Yeah, there's a great book called 365 Thank You Notes. And he
that's great.
Documents how he set out in 1 year to write a thank you note a day. And it was just great. Like, he gave one to the lady that served him at Starbucks, and just these simple things, and how having that sort of attitude of gratefulness really changed his perspective on things.
I had a daughter. My daughter was had some friends. We were driving them down to Pittsburgh, and she was a foreign person. And I asked her what it was like. So she said she just got to the country, and so I took it on myself to be the welcome wagon. I said, well, you're going to love it here. It's a beautiful place. And I started going like this. And she said, are you being sarcastic? I said, no, that's just the way I am. We often confuse being kind with sarcasm. I'll have a great day. Oh, you too.
Yeah, just the tone there a little bit, and what maybe the other person's love language is sarcasm, so they
Yeah.
assume that's what you're using all the time.
I'd like to tell a story about Fred. He was a Presbyterian minister. And when I heard that, I thought he'd have married hundreds of couples. I literally thought hundreds of couples. Turned out he'd only married 3. And one of them was a couple that worked on the show with him. And they were Patsy and Kathy and Patsy. And they were great friends for 5 years. And then they said, this is really, let's become man and wife. And she had been divorced one time before and was very skittish about it. And he was putting the pressure on her. He said, you're the girl for me. We should get married. We're so happy together. She said, the only way I'll do it is if you ask Fred and he does the ceremony. So they go up to his door. It's the one floor up in the QED building. And they said, will you marry us? He goes, yes, but it has to be Saturday, this Saturday. And so they said, okay. Now, word got out really quick. They knew him as a boss. They worked for him. So they didn't have any, like we didn't have the idol worship with that. She said that the word got out so quickly that he was doing a marriage ceremony. When they drove around the bend, she was very nervous. They drove around the bend to her neighborhood. There were kids hanging in trees, people tailgating. They all knew that Fred Rogers was coming to the neighborhood that day, and they all wanted to see him. So her nerves got even worse. So she goes into the house, locks herself in a room, and wouldn't let anybody in except Fred. Fred knocked on the door and came in. And she said, he started fixing my hair. And he said, you're so lucky to have this man. You're going to be everybody wants to see this. I know you're nervous, but it's going to be great. You're going to be so happy. She said, he was just so Christlike. And I thought, I've never heard of anyone described as Christlike, not a pope, not an uncle, not a beloved actor or anything like that. Never heard anyone said he's Christlike. And she said he was just so wonderful like that. And I think that, again, we can't be Christ-like. We can try, but we could be more Fred-like and Jim Stumbaugh-like. We can change the world like that.
Yeah. Well, just to say that about someone who's your boss even is certainly a tribute for sure. And it sets the bar high. I wonder, you mentioned in the book that there are hundreds of Elvis impersonators, thousands.
3,000.
In fact,
they put on their IRS form, occupation, Elvis impersonator, 83,000.
Goodness gracious. And I noticed, I live fairly close to Branson, and they have a new Elvis show this year. Yeah. They just had an Elvis impersonator contest down there.
Never dies.
But no Mr. Rogers impersonators.
Yeah, I said there should be like a one-man show. Like Bruce Springsteen does a one-man show and has made a lot of money. Fred could do a one-man show and make a lot of difference. That's true. I'd love to see that. And just to refamiliarize, all he has to do is tell the stories about him that we all know. But if you get like Bryan Cranston imitating him, it would be wonderful. And I don't know why they do that.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
One of the things that you reminded me of was we had Idlewild Park he was connected with Idlewild Park and had Mr. Rogers' neighborhood in Idlewild Amusement Park. And my daughters worked there. And the one daughter drove the trolley through Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. And she let me drive it one day when the park was closed. And I said, she goes, what are you thinking about? And I said, I'm trying to make this fly. And she said, what do you mean? I said, I want it to fly. I want to fly all around the world in this trolley and show all the people that there's hope. And they'll think of Mr. Rogers. It didn't leave the tracks.
But it's a sweet sentiment. And I wonder if that just the idea of him being so kind all the time, not being a persona, but being real in that, if that's part of why you don't have Mr. Rogers impersonators. It's not really something you can make up as an act.
Yeah, probably.
Just because you don the cardigan sweater and sneakers, that doesn't make you Mr. Rogers.
That's right.
Much more than that. Well, I know our time is winding down. I don't know if anyone has other questions they're wanting to pose today. You have maybe just a minute or two if you'd like to. But random acts of kindness, that's something that we're doing locally with our 100 Acts of Kindness challenge. You can jump in on that from anywhere in the world. Any day
Have
is
you
a good day
done
for a random act of kindness.
have you done anything kind lately?
I have to think, I've not had much interaction today. I did speak to my neighbor while walking my dog. I'm not sure if that qualifies, but we had a nice chat.
I had an opportunity not too long ago. One of the kind things I did was I was at the dry cleaner, and the first thing in line at the dry cleaner was an army uniform had been pressed, and I paid for it. And she goes, "Let me get your name." And I said, "No, just tell them a thankful person did it." So I was proud of that.
Yeah.
I didn't tell my wife about that because she would have said, "What are you, crazy?"
Well, Lisa in St. Louis is asking, what are the barriers to kindness in neighboring?
Rejection. And you can get over that real quickly. If you think, if you're going to be nice to someone and they reject you, then you go on to someone else and be kind to them. Some people are going to be that way, but that's just human nature. They're skeptical and afraid, to let people in like that, because they're suspicious that you're after something. Like if you're kind to your neighbor, you're thinking, they're thinking maybe they're after me for something. They want to get something out of me. But if you just keep living that life, like it's changed me. I've lived here 25 years and I was a normal guy, but I now have a reputation as being a kind man. And it's a nice reputation to have. People talk about you in that, and it's good. When you do nice things, like I give my books away for a lot of people. I say, I want you to have it. Like the crayons book, if I give it away to one person, they'll come back and buy 10. And it's just the way to live. Einstein said that's why we're here, is to help one another and to be kind, and be kind.
You mentioned in your book one of the other spinoffs of kindness in a community is that spirit leads to a spirit of volunteerism.
Yeah. One of the
pastors
said that, because Mr. Rogers is way that he lived, everybody tries to emulate it. And if you have an opportunity to, and then that just multiplies on it. You when you shoveled that driveway, you walked out of there feeling proud and standing taller. There's a real rush you get from being kind to someone. And you don't have to tell them about it. Just it yourself, and you're storing up stock to get into heaven. And I really believe that.
I know many on this call work with groups that want to encourage more volunteerism, want to see more volunteers. So it's there's no silver bullet that makes it happen automatically, but a culture of kindness certainly leads to that.
How do you think with the war, the situation, are people going to react with less kindness? Or it seems like there's been so many acts of kindness involving the Ukrainians that we're facing a real evil person right now, and it sounds so simplistic to say be kind, be kind, be kind, and you also want to have somebody put a bullet in his head.
Yeah,
but
I do think social media and the way we often group ourselves in small like-minded communities have made us less kind, more anxious and fearful of others that do not fit into our small category, our small social media, and that it's had the opposite effect. There's been some recent research just come out on that, actually. So I often tell younger kids, turn off Netflix, put down the smartphone, and go to the front yard. And be seen and interact. And that.
I tell somebody an unrelated thing is like, we talk about happiness and sadness being choices and decisions. The optimist and the pessimist are both wrong about 50% of the time, in my experience. But the optimist is cheerful 100% of the time. And that's a good way to go through life. People gather around, they'll bring you soup when you're sick, invite you to good parties, fix you up with snazzy dates. The pessimist doesn't get those advantages, but everybody revolves around the optimist. They rally to that person. and really, I do think, like, I'm an optimist and I've been wrong a lot, but I'm a happy man. You know, it's when you get to be 59 and you're still happy, something went right.
Absolutely. And I think you
Yeah.
mentioned in your book that's not a genetic trait. That is really a choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's a great observation. Well, thank you, Chris. I know we're coming right up on 1 o'clock, and so I want to be good stewards of everybody's time, and thank you for joining us today. For those that weren't able to attend live, you'll get a unlisted link to this class recording video tomorrow, and hopefully we'll be able to watch the whole video then.
When are you going to road trip up to Latrobe?
Well, I don't know. After reading your book, I really want to. I got to tell you, it was never on my radar to do, but now I kind of want to go see the place now.
We'll welcome you here.
The Eric, I see your question in chat. I'll send you the link to answer your question. But just to wrap everybody's time up here, just a reminder, next month, we're meeting on April 21st, which is again the third Thursday of the month. And our theme next month will be I'm throwing a block party. And we're actually going to have a panel discussion. I have people coming to be on that panel representing Brambleton, Virginia, Grand Junction, Colorado, Arvada, Colorado, and Republic, Missouri, and maybe another community or two. But those communities all have instituted trailers or programs where the city provides sort of a block party in a trailer. You can rent it or acquire it for free. It has tables and chairs and different things in it, and to help you put together a little block event. Now, not every community does that, of course, but I think from the panel we'll get some ideas about what a good block party looks like and how your local community could put together a trailer like this and do this type of program. So I thought that would be interesting, and that will be in April. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I'll hit the end record. Glad you could be here.